Well, hello, everybody, and welcome to Around the Layout, where model railroaders come to tell their story. My name is Ray Arnott, and on tonight's podcast, happy to have from Eden Prairie, Minnesota, Dan Dossa. Dan, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Thank you kindly, Ray.
Well, it's great for us to be able to connect. Really cool to have somebody from Minnesota. The podcast still in its infancy, but Minnesota leads the way in podcast downloads for Around the Layout. So really good to have somebody from Minnesota. Maybe it's you all. Maybe it's just you and all the download. You got multiple devices you're downloading it on. Maybe that's what
I download it everywhere.
There we go. Maybe that's what's throwing the numbers up. But anyway, thank you, Dan, and glad to have you here. And we're going to talk to Dan about a couple things going on. Primarily his Minnesota Commercial Railroad, his switching layout he's got. Got a lot of questions about that. He's also active in the Twin Cities division, NMRA. And also part of the Crossing Gate podcast that's done as part of that group. So lots to talk about here, but I'm going to start right in the beginning, as I try to do with most guests, and ask you, where did the love for railroading come in? Was it the trains themselves? Was there model railroading that introduced you? Where did it begin?
Gosh, it's funny you mentioned it because over Father's Day, my brother posted this picture online of he and I back in 1956. I was 1 year old, and my dad went out and bought us an American Flyer train set, which, knowing what my dad made back in those days, that was a huge expense. But there was always kind of a connection with trains and with model trains, even as a kid. And I never really lost the love for it and the passion for it. So, I've kind of, I would say, kind of dabbled around lifelong, and, really started to get more serious about model railroading after I moved to this house in 1992 and actually had room to build a layout, built a huge layout that taught me everything I didn't want to know about building a huge layout.
Yep.
So then I met the love of my life. We needed that room for a bedroom. I introduced the layout to a Sawzall, and it converted back to a bedroom. And so I was relegated to a very small layout, but I decided I wanted to actually, work through all of the aspects of the layout. So I built a nice little 2x8.5 foot switching layout, kind of a freelance design. And, it was great. It was fun. I learned a lot. Then a couple of years back, 2019, my lovely bride said to me, would you mind moving that layout back into that room? This is because now my son had moved out. And I said, no, I wouldn't do that. But I'm more than willing to build a new layout in that room and get rid of the old layout, which is what I did.
Taking advantage of an opportunity for sure.
Never miss it.
That's right. Now, I do ask about, you had this bigger layout before you introduced it to the Sawzall. Tell us a little bit about it in kind of the lessons you were talking about. What did you learn from having a bigger layout?
Well, I don't know if everything I learned from having a bigger layout or just not having the skills I have today. So when I moved here in 1981, I stumbled across Cedar Lake Yard in Minneapolis, which was a former Minneapolis and St. Louis yard, now and was then being used by the Chicago Northwestern. Got all excited about that. Started modeling the CNW XM and St. L line from Minneapolis down to Albert Lee. But truthfully, there was nothing that would distinguish my layout from anything in reality. It was Cedar Lake Yard because I called it Cedar Lake Yard, not because I tried to model it. And, it was fine. but as the what was the line from the old movie? I can do better. And at some point,
Yeah.
the layout just wasn't working for me anymore.
So
I thought,
it was mostly freelance and only just a tad bit proto. I guess.
Only because I labeled the towns as such. It was, let's face it, it was Walther's cornerstone,
Mhm.
no matter what.
Right.
But I like, it was a lot of layout. It was 2 levels, and it was a lot of maintenance. And honestly, I don't think I was ready for that, despite my optimism. But I had fun with it during the time I had it. When I tore it out, I didn't mind tearing it out either.
Okay, so you probably felt a little overwhelmed by this mad creation that you'd built and this big layout and whatnot. So,
well, and I'll throw in one thing there that I think was pivotal to me. I realized I don't, and it's kind of my pass along. Don't stick with something just because you started it. If it's really not working for you, it's a good opportunity to step back and say, all right, is this something that can really be salvaged, or have I moved beyond and evolved beyond this layout? Don't just try to keep forcing it.
Sure. I think that's fantastic advice. You don't pigeonhole yourself into just finishing it for finishing's sake. There is an opportunity to do a reset. So that's what you did via, like you said, a session with the Sawzall, and you took it down. And then in this interim time, you said you built yourself a small layout. So tell us a little bit about this, this kind of bridge between this big layout you built and then the one you have now.
Sure. Glad to. So, when my wife and I got married, we had 4 kids at home. And so the house is a 5-bedroom house, and we actually needed all the bedrooms.
Sure.
The train room was set up as a code bedroom. But it was a great space for a layout. So, at some point, a couple of years after I'd torn it out, I got the urge to do something again. And, I had, of course, boxes and boxes of stuff that I kept from the old layout. So I started working on this little switching layout. And this is out in our downstairs family room where I am right now. And it was a nice little layout. It was total freelance, but I wanted to try my hand at some urban modeling.
Okay.
And urban scenery. Scenery is something that I just really love doing. So I wanted to work at this and develop it. And this kind of became my palette for doing that. But it worked nicely. I thought the layout came out nicely. It wasn't ultimately where my journey was going to end, but at that point in time, it was great. So it was 2 feet wide, 8.5 feet long, with a little extension on the end. And I started at that point getting more actively connected with people in the local community, the NMRA group, friends of mine, particularly Tom Gazer that runs the Crossing Gate. And I started really working toward upping my game, improving my modeling, focusing on operations, which I always had an interest in, but hadn't really had much time to pursue. So I started looking at that, did some operating sessions with the little layout, and it actually was interesting. I could run 4 jobs on the layout, and it ran about a 2-hour operating session, and it was crowded and hectic, but with 2 operators, if you coordinated well, you could do a nice job with it. It was surprising to me how little you need to have a nice operating layout.
That seems to be a sentiment that seems to be echoed, at least in the last few episodes of around the layout here, where we've talked to people with smaller operating, with smaller layouts. And, we had an episode with Mike King where Mike and I explored that a little bit deeper and, kind of go into the emotional part of it, because when you own a smaller layout and you see some of these people with bigger layouts, you kind of get that, I don't know, size envy and, then the concern of, am I going to be able to keep guys busy long enough to keep them entertained? Are they going to come over at 7:00 and by 7:15 we got to find something else to do? But it's quite amazing how much you can do on just a small layout.
I think you're absolutely right, Ray. I was intrigued by how much there was to do in really a very modest amount of space. And it really got me inspired. So as I was working forward from there, kind of my next step was that I got really interested in prototype modeling and trying to a much greater extent, although by no means perfectly, modeling the prototype.
Sure.
So, my first foray there was a very modest one. Again, my friend Tom Gazer and I were talking about an industry that was on a line that he ran on the Union Pacific, Hawkins Chemical. And he was explaining to me the operations of this little industry. And I just became fascinated by it. And I was laid up for a while with a shoulder surgery and thought, I think I'll build a little micro layout based on that industry.
Okay.
So that was kind of my next step. That was fun. It was fun because I was back at working at my techniques, track laying, wiring, all of those things that we need. But I was also created an operating scenario for this little tiny industry that had a lot of complex switching of tank cars, mostly of hydrochloric acid and sodium hydroxide, but some ag products also. And it was a lot of fun. But I kind of got hooked from there, and that brought me to the present.
Excellent. So isn't it amazing? You're rattling off a couple chemicals there of a factory, and I think that's part of that research as well. The stuff you learn about the industries that the railroad serves to try to emulate and get your prototype right.
Well, that's the rabbit holes that I enjoy. I really like the research end of the hobby, and so discovering things, learning about it, and trying to create a layout that reflects that. And there's one of the things I'm always fond of saying is I want nuance, not nuisance.
Right.
So I want things that make the layout interesting, but I don't want to create unnecessary busy work or construct something that really didn't exist. But on the other hand, if it did, if something was difficult or challenging in operation, and that's the way it was, I'm good with that.
Absolutely.
Sure.
Yeah, and I can appreciate that. Those, like you said, you nailed it right with the word rabbit hole, because I did the same kind of thing when I was working on my layout, my personal switching layout, that you go into these things of, okay, where does that product come from? why do they, and then you just start, and then from there, it's like, next thing you know, you're like, 15 internet searches deep, and you can't even remember what the first topic was, because now you've gone off this off on this tangent about how does calcium chloride get pulled out of the ground and processed to even come to an ice melt factory, those kinds of things. So
exactly.
So when you start this, now you've got this taste of prototype stuff, and now you're gonna build this layout that you started, and you mentioned that in fall of 2019. You're modeling the Minnesota Commercial Railroad. How did you land on that? What was your deciding factor to go to with that railroad?
Well, a fair question. So it's a little bit of this, little of that. On my former switching layout, I would run. I tried to do multiple eras, so I would do the M and St. L back in the late 50s, or I would run the commercial. And given it was freelance, it didn't really much matter because nothing was ever accurate. But the Minnesota Commercial is one of those little gems of a railroad for modeling. First, I like modern railroading. It speaks to me.
Sure.
The commercial has this incredible collection, for those that don't know, of older locomotives. They have Alcos. They have Montreal Locomotive Work units. The EMD units they had, again, all old stuff. The surviving switcher, number 200 on the line, was built in, I think it was 1956. I mean, they've got the last RS-27 in existence running, and they still run it today. I'm thinking, well, how cool is that? So I've got this mix of old engines, Alco Power, which I love, GE, a little bit of EMD thrown in, but it's all in a modern era. The other thing that I love about the commercial is it's a modeler's dream. Right. It's a collection of switching lines. It's an out and back switching operation. And there's, it's got to be like 4 major lines, and then there's some secondary switching also.
Okay.
So, you can kind of look around, take your pick, and you're ready to go.
It's just a railroad being begged to be modeled in an operating setting, eh?
It is, and you can model lots of it, all of it, or a single line. So it's got a lot of versatility, and a lot of the trains on the prototype are fairly small. Single locomotive, 10, 12 cars, 14 cars, small trains.
Right.
Which is really, it's really cool.
So how long did you have that? So you said you had modeled some of this on your previous switching layouts. When was it decided that this is just that layout, the next one, this one that you have now, is going to be Minnesota Commercial? About the time I decided to start building, I was going to go with the commercial, and I was going to I was going to try to create as best I could something that really represented the prototype. My term always is it's not this. I'm not doing architectural models. I'm not that good, but I want something that sustains the illusion. If you come over and the commercial and the lines, if you look at my layout, you're going to know right where you are. The build, I scratch built and kit bashed buildings so they sustain that illusion. They look like
the prototype. They're not exact, but when you look at it, you're like, I know that's the Nokomis mill, for example.
Right.
I know that's interplastic. They have the character and the structure of those buildings.
Absolutely. So how close is the actual prototype railroad to where you live?
Well, good question. Not very far. Right. I'm on the southwest side of the metro.
Okay.
The two lines that I model are in southeast Minneapolis and northeast Minneapolis. Okay. So, I can be there in 20 minutes, half an hour max.
So it's not like you're modeling a railroad that's 1,000 miles away. So there's a lot of things even if you couldn't really get away with, because you know what they look like. You're too close to them not to, right. To pretend that you're, play naive or whatnot. You know it too well not to hit it. And I'm sure that the operators that you have coming over, like you said, and can come over and pick out these spots because they know it as well.
Yeah. And that's been part of the fun of it is trying to create something that has that immediate recognition. And I really do think of my modeling is I'm a storyteller.
Sure.
So my layout creates a story in which my operators then become involved. The more that the scenery, the background, the track, the more that reflects the story, the easier it is for them to get engaged into the story and into this little microcosm of reality.
Yeah, on a not yet aired podcast, we talked to a gentleman named Chris Adams, and he's modeling in the 1940s. But I think it's the similar, whether you're modeling the modern era or you're modeling the 40s or any other era in between or before or after, that it really is kind of telling a history lesson in a layout. You're able to convey that story and convey that history.
You are absolutely right, Ray. One of the things that has been freeing to me about this is I've taken a very a very narrow slice of the pie in the world of model railroading in building this layout. Mm-hmm. What I realized at some point was I'm trying to tell a story. I'm not trying to tell all stories. And I think that a lot of modelers get hung up because they're trying to tell too many stories on their layout versus it's okay to tell a story. Now, it can be a fictional story. It can be an accurate story. It doesn't matter. But if you stay focused on your story, then it will come out well. And the nice thing, as I've gotten involved with other layout operators, is I can go operate on other people's layouts, and it's like books. I can go to the library and pick up a different book. Right. Doesn't have to be, my story doesn't have to be all things. And where this really hit me was one time I was over at another superb modeler layout, Greg Dahl. And Greg is doing this proto-freelance layout, the Missouri Northern. And he's got this enormous auto plant.
Right.
And I'm running the auto racks. And I'm thinking, I never get to run auto racks ever. Mm-hmm. Never, ever, ever. But here I am. I got 12 auto racks. I'm having a good time.
Sure. Yeah. I love this idea, and this is not the first time I've heard it, but you're telling it so well about this, envision a story on your layout, and what is that story telling your reader? And one of the other thought about that is if you try to tell too much of a story, it's just overwhelming. It's overwhelming to you. It's overwhelming to your reader. You really want to drill down and know what it is, know what your passion is about the railroad, the model, the prototype or the freelance or whatever it is that you're modeling. Know what your passion is and make sure it conveys back to your listener and back to you when you look at it. Read your own story.
Yeah, absolutely. And a couple of people on the Crossing Gate podcast have commented about the enjoyment of watching the story come alive,
right,
when you host an operating session, and all of a sudden, the trains are doing what they should be doing, and it just if you will, in my weird mind, it all feels right. Everything feels right with the world. Just
sure
watching that unfold.
No, I think there's actually something really, really cool about that. And you watch some, especially when somebody else is running your layout, because then it's like, you're not, you don't realize you disconnect and you're able to step back and watch, and it's happening. All these sessions of you sitting there looking at your track plan or studying the prototype or whatnot are all coming to life. And it's what you've seen in the field is now what you see on your layout.
Exactly. It is so much fun. Plus, I get to have a really great gang of guys come by when we do it. So,
the camaraderie in this hobby is just, I don't know. It's hard to beat. It really is. I've been a part of a bunch of different things in my life of groups and whatnot, and it's really hard to top the camaraderie that a fellow model railroader has, because you're always seeking for that like person, somebody that's like you, that that justifies that craziness in your head. And when you find that person, right, then and they it's like, yeah, you've hit it, and I've had some great friends and still have some great friends that are that help me justify this funny thing we do, which is model trains.
I like the way a guy I met once said it, but he was more into collecting stuff. But as he said about the spiraling into these various rabbit holes, and he said, well, it's totally engrossing and totally meaningless. Mm-hmm. And I thought, isn't that a great way for a hobby to be? Yeah. I want this to be something where if I don't do it right, who cares? Nobody's going to die.
No.
If it's not perfect, I can always try it again.
Right.
I will make mistakes. I'll learn from those mistakes, and I'll go forward. The other thing is just it's so nice when you can find that group of people that are really talented, smart, and they can support and encourage you. They give you the feedback of the things you're doing right and the things you're not doing right. And it's really been a wonderful experience.
Yeah. And you learn a lot from both, including those that have that, maybe sometimes they call it brutal honesty, which is nice at times, right? You need to be told, and it's good, but a brutal honesty followed by, and I'll help you by giving you a lesson in X, or, those kinds of things is really good. And for the most part, vast majority of model railroaders you talk to are those that will help lift you up, that will help you move forward. And that's really an ultra cool part of our hobby for sure.
Absolutely, Ray. And I'm sure you found this too. The people who are the most skilled, the most talented, they're inevitably the nicest, kindest, caring people. They understand the struggles. They understand the mistakes because they've made them all.
Yeah, to get that good, they've had to have, right? Just you don't wake up one day and create masterpieces. You struggle, you throw stuff away, you redo it, and it's not your first attempt that gets everything done. Like everything else in this world, right?
Exactly.
It's just those kinds of things, and learn lessons. I do want to get back to, we talked about the Minnesota commercial, because we're not talking about a Class 1 railroad for sure, in popularity and whatnot. What were some of the challenges you faced of, as far as rolling stock and locomotives and whatnot to model the Minnesota commercial?
Well, I have to confess to a developing embarrassment of riches.
Oh boy, here we go.
So when I started looking at the commercial, there were two factory painted models of the commercial. And Atlas made both of them. And anything else you wanted to do, you were going to have to do yourself. Now the good news was a lot of their locomotives, you could buy it off the shelf, and as long as you were willing to repaint it, it was going to be okay. An NW2 switcher, no problem. My Jeep 7, no problem. It's there, but you're not going to pick it up off the shelf.
Sure.
So as I started down this rabbit hole, I started with my factory painted units, and then realized I wanted to go a little further. And so again, as I get by with a little help from my friends, I started looking at painting and decaling. So I made my first efforts there. I started with a model of their CF7. They had one, which you're going to find a lot when I talk about the commercial, one engine in a particular model. They had one CF7, 484, the city of Bayport.
Okay.
But I always liked CF7s.
Sure.
So I thought, well, hey, I could do that, couldn't I? And so a friend of mine, we got it painted up. I did the decaling. And you know what? I'm kind of proud of it. I thought it came out kind of sweet. And it got me hooked to try some others. So, I added some more in. One thing that I'm particularly fond of is they would do a lot of patch outs. They're a small railroad. They're a make do.
Yeah, there's no big budget for painting and matching, and I'm sure.
Yeah. So exactly. So like for example, 484, City of Bayport. If you look at the number boards, they're offset. Why? Because the old number was 2484, and they just blanked out the two. They didn't bother to do anything else.
Yep.
So I did a few of those. One of their GP7s came out in it. They bought it from the Bangor in a Rooststock.
Yep.
And it is the prototype is the rattiest darn engine I've ever seen. It really looks like a bucket of rust.
Sure. Yep.
So I haven't gotten the weathering yet because I'm not up to my skills there. I'm not ready for that. But with some help of a friend, we made decals so I could do the patched out.
Awesome.
Scheme of this. Now, eventually they did repaint it into their red, but I thought that patch out just looks great. So,
is that when you decide maybe it's time to pause the era and just it was all prior to that painting, or?
Yeah, I'm willing to not look that closely. Speaking of era, that's the commercial started in 1987, so everything I'm doing is a modern era. But of course, once you climb down the rabbit hole,
sure,
you start to look at, that was a long time ago.
Right.
And I can't fully rely on what I see today. I just have to do my best.
Sure.
And I'm sure, at some point somebody's going to show up on the layout and say, oh, by the way, Dan, that wasn't how it was. But so far, so good.
There you
But
go.
I'm willing to be a little flexible with the color schemes. And so that's been kind of a fun little thing to play around with. And so, over time I've gotten better. I've painted up or detailed up and decaled some locomotives. A friend of mine, Joe Binish, who is a modeler par excellence,
Yep.
was nice enough to throw some paint on some locomotives for me. And he did up a little SW1 that's used for industrial switching on one of the lines that I model.
Excellent.
I was able to put that in there and actually add a third operator to my session. So, I've just sort of kind of expanded from where I started to see, can I add more? Can I incorporate more? And the thing I should mention is I modeled 2 lines of the commercial. The line that runs along Hennepin Avenue, which was mostly grain elevators. And the section that I model is only about 2 blocks of that, but it incorporates a couple grain elevators, Shire Malting, and ADM's Nokomis Mill.
Sure.
The other section I model is Northeast Minneapolis, which if you're a local, you call it Northeast.
Okay.
So it's up in Northeast.
Okay.
And it's a little switching line that winds through this neighborhood. It's a working man's neighborhood.
Sure.
And terminates at this really cool little industry, Interplastic, which is serviced by a switchback, which is long enough for 1 engine and 1 car. But the industry takes about 5 cars. So it's a switchman's nightmare.
So as you were picking these industries to model, I'm sure, operations was foremost on your mind. Was there any of them that were like, it was beyond just the switching, like the industry itself was something really representative to you, or something you really enjoyed the actual industry part of that was a qualifier to get on your layout?
Yeah, most of them, but in particular, the Nokomis Mill, ADM's Nokomis Mill.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just such an iconic structure. And the other one up in Northeast is Cream of Wheat. That was, an iconic company here in
Sure.
the Twin Cities. And interestingly, again, crawling down the rabbit holes, they would the railroads would ship air slide hoppers, typically single bay air slide hoppers, loaded with farina, from the Nokomis Mill in southeast Minneapolis to Cream of Wheat in Northeast. So I thought, well, that's pretty darn cool. So I wanted to get that industry in there. Now, Cream of Wheat shut down in early 2002, and the building still stands, and it's now condominiums.
Okay.
But if you ever had Cream of Wheat for breakfast back in those days, this is where it came from, was that factory.
Yeah. Is Cream of Wheat no longer available, or is it just not made there in Minneapolis anymore?
It's still available. It's not made there anymore.
Yeah, okay.
It was bought out by, one of the big multi-food corporations.
Gotcha.
But even that rabbit hole, I looked at, could I model the Cream of Wheat building?
All right.
Well, the answer is maybe somebody could, but not me. This is a building that is, you can Google it online. It's an iconic building.
Sure.
But it doesn't look like anything else. And I'm looking around, trying to find structures that I could kit bash into that building. Nothing is working. Nothing at all. And COVID was kind of my friend through this whole journey in an ironic way, because I was off of work and I had a lot of time.
Right.
So, I started digging around online, and there's a photo of the cream of wheat building. Now I have other people in town here who have shot photos also of this, but this one was shot from the track, looking toward the building, toward the loading area, and it was there were no train cars in the way.
Right.
And I thought if I could blow up that photo, it would, I could just do the building as a photo backdrop and just have a track leading to it. Great idea, except for the fact that the photo online was so small that when I tried to do that, it just degraded to nothing.
Sure. Yeah.
But then, again, because I had time, I started to track it. Well, maybe I can find who shot that photo. So I started looking around. Well, I caught the guy's name. It's Stuart Clipper.
Okay.
And Stuart's a professional photographer. He's exhibited at some, I don't know, this little dinky, the Guggenheim. Yeah. Something like that. Yeah.
Sure.
I mean, he's, but as a kid, he loved cream of wheat. So he's traveling around the Twin Cities and, he loves taking photographs. So he shot a bunch of photos of cream of wheat. So I'm thinking, okay, now I know who shot it. Where do I find this guy, if he's even still around? Well, it turns out I tracked down his webpage. I tracked him down. I got in contact with him. He actually lives a block and a half from my old house in South Minneapolis.
Oh, wild.
We got to chatting, and he's like, yeah, I'll I've got those all on digital. I'll send you all the digital photos I have of it. And it was just charming. We had a wonderful conversation. We're friends on Facebook now. And I'm thinking, what a great adventure.
Oh, yes.
Tracking that down.
Oh, yeah. Especially if you're willing to stick your neck out just a little bit and connect with new people and whatnot. You can learn so much and connect with new people. I've done the same where you talk to former railroad employees or current railroad employees or people that are a part of these industries. And all of a sudden it's like they know somebody that knows somebody that knows somebody, but you starts by asking the question and, digging out there, and it's wild the things you'll find.
Isn't that the truth? Isn't that just, it's amazing what you can learn if you take the time and ask. And it doesn't always pay off, but it's like hunting or, going to a flea market. It's finding the treasures.
Sure.
And when you have them, you're like, wow, I didn't know that. I met another guy who, he was the plant foreman at Cream of Wheat. So he explained to me, a little bit about the operation, there with the rail cars and stuff. And I'm like, God, this is just, this is so much fun.
It's like genealogy of industry, isn't it? Where you're just kind of like going back and digging and finding out who's who. And then you just start putting this whole thing together, and it's pretty wild. So,
isn't it? It's just amazing.
So I see your current layout is now up to a point where you're holding some operating sessions. I think I saw a familiar face in there. Was that William Sampson I saw in one of those photos?
Yeah, that's my friend Will Sampson.
Awesome.
One of the greatest assets here in the Twin Cities, the modeling community, and just a great guy. Yeah,
and we're still trying to get him on the schedule. We're looking forward to having him on the show and talking to him. And it is funny, the picture that's on there. He's got quite a look on his face, and he's holding that throttle. Almost looks like he's about to blow something up if you look at that photo, right? But yeah, it's great. So May 1st, you held an operating session. Let's talk about, how you hold an operating session, because, on a smaller layout, I think it's a challenge. There's a lot of planning going into it and making sure that things run smoothly and, keeping everybody busy. You use Switch List to organize your switching. Tell us a little bit about the software and how you got into that.
Sure. Well, I was, a lot of people with large layouts use car cards. And so when I started thinking about operation, of course, I thought, well, car cards. And car cards wonderful on layouts where people are, where the cars really aren't rotating off the layout, and they're largely self-correcting. You know where stuff is if if the cards are used properly. It's a great system. Personally, for the kind of operation I do with switching, I like a switch list. And so on my old layout, I used to do a switch list by hand, which if you're a doctor like me, you don't have good handwriting.
I think that's a prerequisite, right?
It was required. That's why I ended up doing what I do. So
sure.
It's like, okay, I can't write.
Yep.
Never could.
Right.
So I started looking on the new layout. I started looking at what's available. And essentially I found three. The first one I found was NMRA. And of course, that's the one that a lot of people go to. I fled the room in terror because the learning curve is a little steeper than climbing Everest. So it just wasn't going to work for me. I couldn't make sense of the darn thing. And I thought, oh, I'm not having fun with this. The next one I found was Ship It. And that was $100. And I said, no, I'm too cheap for that. So, but somewhere along the way, and I don't even remember exactly where, somebody online mentioned this program called Switch List. Now, the price is right. It's free.
Yep.
Which
anybody can afford.
Anybody can afford that one.
Yep.
The bad news is it only works with a Mac operating system. There is no Windows version. You can't run it on a Windows-based computer.
Right.
So that's the downside. But what I learned was that it was a lot less of a steep learning curve. And I mean, I have tweaked this thing a zillion ways to get it to do what I want it to do. But the truth of the matter is it's been fun because I just goof around with it. And, my background in psychology, we would describe what we call black box research. Mm-hmm. So in other words, you're putting a stimulus into a situation and you have no knowledge of what's actually going on within the subject. They're a black box. And then you're looking at the output. So you've got input, black box, output. Well, since I'm not a computer guy, that's how I had to kind of fiddle around with switch lists. If I change these parameters, what happens? What does my output look like?
Yep.
Oh my gosh, crap. No, that's not what I want. So I did a lot of fiddling with it.
Sure.
And the thing was, I knew what I wanted it to do.
Yeah.
I just had to figure out how to get there.
Right.
But I personally like switch list. I can't say enough good about it. It's a fairly straightforward and fairly simple program. The simpler your layout, the easier it is to use switch list. Most of my problems that I struggled with weren't the fault of the program. They were the fault that I was trying to make the program do things that it wasn't set up to do. So I had to make more and more modifications to it.
Sure.
But I think I've got it to the point now that I'm pretty happy with it.
Yeah, and I've had some background in software a long time ago, and we used to kind of that do you write software for policy or policy for software? Like do you let the software run your business, or do you let your business tell the software what to do? And sometimes you got to it's like a give and take a little bit, and and then that tweaking. How much of that did you have to modify your ops to get the switch list to work, or were you able to get it to pretty much match up to what you wanted to do?
More or less. I had it to the point where it was a solid 85% of what I wanted.
Sure.
In an operating session, I run 4 trains two on each of the lines, the Hennepin line and the Hiawatha line. Plus I run the, that little switcher I mentioned, which switches cars for Shire malting. Mm-hmm. So, what the program does, which, is if you've done software work, is it never does what I want it to. It does what I tell it to.
Yeah.
Which is annoying, but so that's the curse.
Yeah.
So I had it doing most of what I wanted, but it wasn't doing everything I wanted. So I kept, again, fiddling around with it. But then, I kind of finally got comfortable enough with the program just to see I can change configurations of stuff. And I think this is really where I need to go. And I'm not talking about anything involving the program at all.
Right.
What I was doing was I'm configuring the input, the freight traffic. So a big one there. Yeah. I have 6 slots in industries that take covered hoppers of some form.
Okay.
Now, what I want is I want each of those 6 to only take certain covered hoppers. And so what I ended up doing was, because I realized that I don't have to be stuck with just the designation covered hopper. I could modify this. So, what I started to create were what I call freight car pools. So, for example, I'll take Shire malting. Shire malting receives loads of barley, covered hoppers full of barley from the Dakotas, Canada, and it ships loads of malted barley to breweries, mostly to Budweiser.
Okay.
I don't honestly even know if it's shipped to any other industries, other beverage industries, but on my layout it does.
Okay.
So I started to look at that and I said, I'm going to create a pool of hopper cars that are, for example, there is the barley pool.
Yep.
These are incoming cars. A nice big modern BNSF, CP, Sioux Line, covered hoppers. They're pristine and impressive and all of that. They're bringing in the barley.
Yep.
The malted barley is going out in little junkier, used, leased cars. And that's the malted barley pool. So I created all these pools.
Okay.
Of these cars, and that helped a lot. So, little tweaks like that. And then the program has it set where you can make designations within industries, various parameters. So the length of the sidings, what's the length of your trains? Does your industry have doors that are used? One of them, on my current layout, there's also a Hawkins chemical plant, and they get 2 types of chemicals, but the way the actual unloading bays are is it's every other one is a different chemical. So I thought, well, I can set that up in the program. So that's kind of fun.
Yeah. So, that definitely makes operating interesting too. Cause when you have to, it isn't just a car for a car, and it isn't just, you're actually doing something, and it's more specific. So it slows it down. I know a couple operators personally that do the same thing, and boy, does that make the operating a lot of fun. Cause now you really got to think, it out.
It does. And you mentioned Will Sampson, and one of the things that Will and I did was we've been going through my locomotive fleet, and we have with DCC we have dialed back the speed.
Right.
on my locomotive. So, most of my locomotives, the ones that we've programmed, have a top speed of about 20 scale miles an hour.
Yeah.
And so there's no jackrabbiting.
Sure. Yeah.
It's like, stop, take your time, smell the roses, enjoy it.
Yes.
And so that's worked well, and no complaints from my operators.
No, it takes time. It looks better. When you try to go fast, it just doesn't look good. A nice slow roll is so enjoyable to not only operate with, but just to watch and whatnot.
Yeah. So that's kind of how I've used the switch list program is, and I think, famous last words, I think I've got it in its final iteration. I'm going to schedule something in July, an op session, and we'll kind of see. But what I'm generating as far as switch lists looks right to me.
I've heard many rave about switch list, and you must have already been on the Mac platform to be able to do this, right? You didn't have to go out and buy a computer to do switch list, I would hope.
Exactly. Yeah, I already had a Mac, so
yeah,
I was good there.
And hopefully someday somebody will figure out a way to tweak it into a Windows format and whatnot, because I think it'd be wildly popular amongst a lot of guys based on the feedback of those who have been able to run it on Mac. And like you said, the price is right, and Dan, maybe they'll give you 100% of the profits made from it. So for advertising it here, want to also talk to you about the Crossing Gate podcast that you're a part of and whatnot. So it's a podcast I've listened to. It's a great podcast put together by the Twin Cities division of the NMRA. Tell us a little bit about how that got started and how you got involved with the podcast.
Well, it's my good buddy Tom Gazer. He and I, we get together. We try to get together weekly for bagels when our schedules coincide, which has been a challenge lately. But
sure,
we still try to do that. So we've been buddies for a long time, and he's a very skilled, talented modeler, and so he's kind of been a great mentor for me in learning to up my game,
sure,
to use best practices, to get in there and fix something that's not right, to really think through what I'm doing. And that's been wonderful. So he started doing this podcast, and actually I'll be on there Wednesday night. He's going to record another one, but
yep.
We'll, a lot of times he and I will sit down, we'll brainstorm ideas for the topics or for the commercials. If you've seen any of those.
Yes, you've done well with that. A lot of great humor on there. That's for sure.
Yes. Thank you. The Quasimodo line about the bell, that was mine.
Yeah, there you go.
But it's been a lot of fun, and it's sort of, it's been this sort of nucleus of guys in the Twin Cities who, I look at all of them, and I'm so impressed with their level of skill, and it's they're all just wonderful, great guys to hang around with, spend time with, and they sort of all have a right perspective on this. They don't. It's not life and death. It's not, they're not on this holy crusade. They're, they just like trains like the rest of us.
Sure.
And, all of us have our particular skills, or at least they do. And then I get to come along. So, it's been fun. And the topics, kind of like here, it's a pretty free flowing discussion, and then Tom, God love him, he sits down and edits it so it sounds halfway as intelligent when he gets done.
Right. Yeah, that's great. It's a great way to connect with people. It's a great way to spread the word, not only about the Twin Cities division and then the NMRA. There, it also, like you said, connects with other people. You get people from, it's wild, all over the world listening to these podcasts, and the positive feedback is just a motivator, not only for the podcast, but you as a modeler and being able to just hear all sorts of different ideas, and that networking has really made the hobby. And I said it in the last podcast I recorded, I'll say it again. We're living in a great time in model railroading.
Oh, this is, in my humble opinion, this is the golden era for model railroading. I mean, we have equipment that is fabulous, right? Just fabulous. So we've got that. We have an ability to connect around the world. I'm friends with a guy who is modeling the Minnesota Commercial in New Zealand.
Oh, that's wild.
Yeah, and I'm chatting with him. I'm like, I got to ask you, how did a Kiwi end up modeling this little obscure industrial railroad in Minnesota? And so he explained that to me. But I'm like, wow, that's really fun. I talk to people, and communicate back and forth with people all over the world. Yes. And I thought, 30 years ago, we couldn't do that. No. The level of information that we can access now, because, I don't know these things, but, oh, by the way, so-and-so, they know this information. Guy here, Dan Linfors, works for the Minnesota Commercial. Yeah. I can say, hey, Dan, I had him over for one of my early operating sessions, and I'm like, am I doing this right? Am I missing something? So I've actually got to bring him back for one of the more evolved sessions, because I want, he's been an engineer and a conductor on both of these lines, and he can tell me, yeah, this is how we do that, or no, what were you smoking when you thought that?
But it's going to be the fact checking of your layout provided by a former employee. So that's going to be pretty wild.
Yeah. But the cool thing is, it's like, he's not a snob. He's a really nice man.
Sure.
But he knows this stuff. So I can ask the questions to somebody who knows.
Right.
And I thought, God, isn't that fabulous? So it's always my plug to people is, get involved, get to know your community, make friends, extend yourself out there. I know we're all a little shy, we're all a little geeky, but it's okay. Yeah. Do it anyhow. You never know where the next jam is. And around the corner.
Yeah. Especially in 2022. I mean, the ability for us to connect, electronically and all these other means is just there. It doesn't even have to be anything big. An email, just send an email or send them a message, or, there's a lot of ways to get yourself connected with other modelers, with people who know, and ask the questions, because the good modelers will answer those questions. They will be the ones that'll step up and say, hey, I love sharing this information because somebody shared it with me, and and they're able to carry that forward.
Yeah, we've all had those people who helped us along. None of us got where we're at or where we're going to be alone.
Right.
Other people helped us along, gave us a leg up, encouraged us, said, yeah, I did the same thing. Yeah, I screwed that up too. Here's how you fix it.
Yes.
Yeah, I know you did that, but next time, and I mean, all of those things, it's just, the support, the encouragement, and then the knowledge.
Absolutely.
I've kind of dedicated myself to trying to do best practices on the current layout. Like, one of the things I really like, when I wired it up, there's no solder under my layout. Not a drop. The only solder in my wiring is the feeders to the track.
Okay.
And I started using something I'd learned about called T-tap connectors. Yep. And oh my gosh, it's like, these are fabulous.
Right.
Just, so great to work with.
Yeah. Well, it's amazing the stuff that's out there, the new technology that comes along, and all that information shared. We're going to wrap up. I do want to ask you before we go. You did mention that you gave me these great notes to work with, so you made my job as host really easy. You mentioned in here that this fall you're going to be retiring and whatnot. So what does that mean for the Minnesota commercial? What's the next big plans for your layout?
Well, I'm good question. I've got like every other model router, about a zillion projects.
Sure.
To work on, but I've now finished all of the structures on the layout.
Okay.
So that part is done. I think finally, any of the quirks in the track have been worked out, because I found I'm always having to move something around a little bit so it works better. And so I thought, rather than do what I would do in the past, which is I would always rush to get the ballast in, I'm like, no, I'm just going to leave it.
Yep.
And I'll come back to that eventually. But I want to make sure that when I do, this track is good to go.
Right.
So, I'm kind of ready to start doing the layers of scenery beyond just the buildings. Yep. Working on that. I've got a couple of locomotives I'm working on in the works. I'm building a model of the commercials RS-20, which is an ex-Green Bay and Western chop nose RS-3. That'll be fun. And I should get it done just in time for Bowser to release theirs and have it look 100 times better, so I can buy that one. So I've got that going on. I'm looking forward to hosting more operating sessions. I'm looking forward to attending more operating sessions. So all of those things. And then the last one is the dreaded W word for me, which is learning skills better than my very low level now with weathering.
Okay. Yeah.
So that's a big one.
But one that you'll be able to have some time with, and I'm sure plenty of help amongst the talented group that you associate yourself with and whatnot. And of course, there's tons and tons of information. So I'm sure you're going to find that to be very enjoyable. So
I'm looking forward to it. I've been doing this for 40 years, and I don't mind hanging up my spurs.
There you go. Great. Well, Dan, thanks for coming on Around the Layout. I want to congratulate you on your retirement, your pending retirement this fall. I look forward to hearing you more on the Crossing Gate podcast. I'm sure you'll be doing some more of those episodes as well in the time that after your retirement. And then we'll definitely get you back on later and get some updates on the Minnesota commercial, talk about your weathering and what you've learned and a whole bunch more. So thanks for being on the show.
Ray, it was my pleasure. It was a wonderful time chatting with you. And I look forward to watching more of Around the Layout with you.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of Around the Layout. You'll find more about today's show on our Facebook page, facebook.com/Around the Layout. Learn more about the show and check out past and future episodes on our website, aroundthelayout.com. And send us your feedback. We'd love to hear from you. aroundthelayout@gmail.com. Thanks again for hanging out with us around the layout.